Oh, hi.
Hey,
Hello. Hello. Hi, Joe. Good to see you. Did you
thanks.
have a good Did you have a good disc tournament this last weekend? I think you did really well, I guess, except for there was one team that was really good.
Yeah, yeah. Well, by the way, this is the After Surfers podcast.
Oh, yeah.
If you don't know what that is, so we're working our way through Randy Alcorn's God's Promise of Happiness. But here's our banter at the beginning. Yeah, so I played the Northwest Doubles Championship this weekend, and there's different tiers, levels of, competition. There's three levels of amateur and then professional.
Okay.
Legitimately, I belong in like the middle tier of amateur,
Mm,
but my partner is in the top tier of amateur, and so whoever your partner is, you have to play at that level.
that makes
So
sense.
we were at the top tier of amateur. The team that took first place probably should have been playing pro because they would have taken second place in professional, only one stroke off the winners of professional.
Oh, way better than you guys.
Yeah, they were very good. And Bryson, who is my partner, he's 14 years old, and he's incredibly good. If there would have been two of Bryson, they would have been more competitive with that team. But I don't know, they were very very good. And yeah, so we went into the last day. There were four of us within one shot of each other trying to get second place.
Mm.
And he and I shot 11 under par, which was 10 better than the next team. So we played really, really well. And both of us came out of it feeling pretty stoked with how we played. There was only two other teams out of like a 50 team field that shot better than we did that day. And that was the pro team and the team that would have been the runner up to pro. So we did really good.
Wow.
It was cool.
You did. How quickly did you realize the team that took your bracket was so much better than you?
Oh, before it started, like ratings are public. So I could see how high they were rated. And then maybe about 5 or 6 holes into our round, the people we were playing on our card with were like, "Oh yeah, that team up there, they they play professional when they play as singles, but when they do doubles events, they play amateur." And they were just griping about that team most of it. And they
How
were
did that happen then?
they were 8 strokes ahead of us after the first round, and then 14 strokes ahead of us after the second round or something.
How were they allowed to be amateur if they're normally professionals?
It doesn't. They're not. I don't know. It's
My
the
sense
people.
of injustice is rising.
Well, I mean, I didn't care that much, because the prizes were basically nothing. It was you're playing for pride, and I told Bryson, I'm like, I really don't care if they're sandbagging because we know who we're playing against, and we're not really competing against those guys. We're competing against the rest of this pool. So if we take second place, that means we won.
Right, because they shouldn't have been in that pool.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So we took first
Wow.
place by 10 strokes, according to my and
Way to have great perspective. Did it help you have a little happiness in how you played?
oh yeah. Well, we just play. If there was another team that played as well or beat us, I would still be happy because we played. I mean, seriously, it's like one of those things where it's like if your favorite basketball team beats the best team in the league by 20 points, and you're like, well, how did that happen? Like things just clicked, and he was Bryson was saddled with an inferior partner, and we still managed to do well. So it was cool. We had a good time.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Do you know what day it is? It is International Happiness Day.
Oh my gosh. This
Yes.
could not be more appropriate then.
I was preparing for this and it was like, That's got to be a joke, right? No, actually, it's International Happiness Day. It's a UN sponsored holiday.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, but okay. So we should probably get into the book based on that. We're in
Yes,
chapter
sir.
3 for love, happiness in the wrong places or something like that, right?
Happiness killers.
The killers. He should have he should have named that looking for happiness in the wrong places, right? Because chapter 4 is looking for happiness in the right places. Yeah, it's like, come on, get a better title.
Well, I mean, the term happiness killers is it's certainly an intriguing title, but for me, it actually said the wrong thing. Because to me, like happiness killer, I think about people who are like toxic or that shut down happiness. So my assumption coming into this chapter was we were going to talk about people that you could surround yourself with that dampen or inhibit your happiness. So that's really what I thought we were getting into. So when it was something else, yeah, and part of that is because that's a bit of my worldview right now is working into the assumption that there are people around us that are not good for us, and we need to be empowered to create separation and have healthy boundaries.
But that's not at all what he's talking about.
No, nothing whatsoever. I mean, not that it isn't valid, but it's just not what he's talking about.
So his basic statement that he point. Let's start with that. How would you describe his basic point? You could say it in a sentence, maybe two.
That there are obstacles to happiness that we should avoid, or I mean that, and sin being primary among them.
Yes, I agree. If you broaden what you mean by sin to things like not being grateful, unrepentance, um, just kind of self-centeredness, that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, materialism, distractions.
All of that. It's a very broad, if you use sin in a very broad sense,
Yeah,
rather than like the Ten Commandments. Yeah. I agree. I think that's his basic idea is that if I to use shorthand, sin is what gets in the way of us being as happy as God wants us to be. Do you think he made his argument?
well, no. If we and I just chatted about this briefly before we started, and we stopped ourselves from going too deep into it. Well, I'll tell you what I already told you what I thought he was going to address, and then once I got into it and I realized kind of where he was going, I tried to take off my I was born and raised in the church hat and put myself in as a member of the audience that is skeptical or non-Christian.
Okay.
And how effective would this chapter be to me? Like, would it resonate with me? And I came away kind of going, maybe, you know,
Really?
but within like, because the underpinning of sin might be off-putting to people who don't maybe share the same morality, but not the same terminology for it.
Permanent. Yeah. And
Yeah,
I'm using sin because I'm talking to Christians generally right now.
right. But the idea of materialism, yeah, that should resonate with people.
True.
Because to me, that's kind of a core human,
Right.
issue, and
Black.
distractions.
That speaks.
Yeah. So there's some underlying pieces there. It wasn't necessarily, but the audience here was clearly people who are already in the church, who are themselves seeking happiness and maybe seeking a recipe for happiness. And so what I saw was more like a bland chili recipe, something that's serviceable, but not really earth shattering. It's kind of common sense. And it doesn't really make the point to me. I didn't come away going, oh, if I just stop sinning, all of a sudden I'm going to be happy. Because I don't think, I mean, maybe there's a correlation, but there's not cause necessarily in that.
Yeah, it's like I feel like he made the assertions but didn't back up those assertions.
Yeah.
I mean, like he talks about gratitude, for instance, which he's going to talk about gratitude next time too. But and this is what I mean. He repeats himself, but it's like, okay, yes, I agree that lack of gratitude and materialism is a cause for unhappiness. I think those are true statements, but he didn't show me why that's true.
There's no substantiation.
There's no substantiation, so, you just kind of well, as you put it, it's a bland recipe. There's no foundation. There's no meat to it. It's a chili without any meat in it.
Right. And no cumin and
No.
undersalted.
And undersalted. It's like, yes, it's a chili. Come on, you can do better. You can do better.
Well, and if you're laying things, I'm realizing that we're reading kind of the Reader's Digest version of that, and
Right.
and maybe there's additional substantiation within that. What I found is it's like, yeah, materialism, that's an issue. Don't you agree? Next, right? It's like,
Right.
well, why? But I know people who outwardly seem pretty happy and they got lots of stuff, so, or I know people who don't have anything that are miserable. So, I mean, it's it's kind of a black and white perspective where, it almost undermines the idea of empowerment, right? It's like you here are things that can lead to unhappiness or can get in the way of happiness. What are you going to do about that? It's an issue without a resolution.
Yeah, and no handholds of. Yes, for me, I keep going back to so materialism. All right, well, if you would explain to me exactly what's going on in my thinking with materialism that's actually the issue, and how that leads to unhappiness, well, maybe I could be a little bit better. I'd be able to dig down deeper and go, okay, if I think about it differently this way or that way, I would probably be helpful.
Well, maybe I can share something for myself as I consider materialism, because I think about it alongside greed, having enough and yet wanting more. Because I find myself constantly battling between the desire to give everything away and the desire to feed my insecurity that stems from the way I grew up, where we were very financially insecure, and to clutch onto things desperately for fear of what might not be there. And I'll give you a very slight example. Is my disc golf disc collection is enormous. I don't need them. Why buy more, right? I've got everything I need. And I'm like, well, I could just, there's people out there that I play with that would really benefit if, like, I could give these away. Like, I could donate them to, like, the high school. There's, like, a lot of stuff. And then my brain goes, yeah, but then you wouldn't have those discs anymore. And, it's like, I know this is a very trite example, but like,
No, it's not though. It's not though.
It's like, oh, I'm going to go buy a couple more discs. What are you going to do with those? Well, I'm going to put them on a shelf. Are you ever going to throw them? Maybe. Well, is there something else you could do with your money there? Because you're going to feel that dopamine hit, the satisfaction of having something bright and shiny that's new. But it's a very short lifespan there. We were talking about gambling with Sam this week, and the idea that it's addictive, and that there are things in place, even though he's too young to gamble, that they have apps that that basically create legal versions of that. And Sam loves basketball. He loves stats, and he talks to me about this app that he uses where he can meet the over under on certain players getting a certain number of rebounds and stuff. And we're like, what that's doing is it's training your brain to gamble. And once you start to feed that, it's messing with your mind. It's a drug, right? So anyway, it's the same kind of thing. It's like a hit that diminishes, and you're always looking for the next dopamine hit. And to me, that's a lot of what materialism is.
What I find interesting about this conversation is, one, it's very normal and very common. And I've tried to talk to people about how good counseling helps you deal with some of these deep things to get better. It's really, really good discipleship. And what I'm thinking about with how you're going through, and again, this is not judgmental. It's like, because I have my own things that are similar. It's like there's little truths that you believe in there that you have to undo, because you're trusting in and getting this little security in materials rather than trusting in God, right?
Yeah.
But it takes someone helping you think through that stuff to kind of undo it. But for a lot of people, we just, especially as Christians, we just go, that's just what it is. And we never actually work on those issues, those deep, subtle, and I suppose you could call it sin.
What's interesting to me, is that I think many of us are aware of where we're falling short. Maybe we're not putting a name on it. For me, I can recognize greed in myself, and I recognize where it comes from. It comes from that financial insecurity of my upbringing, and it's not like I'm stealing money from people or whatever. It's just that I am holding on to something material for fear of not having it. But I have an awareness of it. And once I have that awareness, I kind of need to name it as a sin. But it's really easy in our current culture to say, well, it's a sin, but is it really an issue? Because we get into comparison and we're like, because man, the stuff those people are doing, that's pretty bad. So within that context, I'm doing just fine.
Right. And so we tolerate these things.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Oh, right. And we don't want it because we don't want to enable it as sin. But even for you, the fact that you have enough self-reflection that's happened that you can know kind of where it came from. I think for many of us, we can't even get that far. We just know we really want stuff, and it just stops there. And I guess it's just an encouragement of this is the kinds of things to work on that without intentional working, you won't get to. I do have one more question that I wanted to ask you, or note.
Real quick, there's kind of a weird sound, almost like a parrot.
There you go. It's another phone. The church phone, and its ring is a quack.
Okay, that's helpful, because I thought there was something going on with your audio, and I'm like, wow, we got to fix that before we go any further.
One of the other things I just saw in here that I found that was really interesting was how he's quoting Hebrews 11:25, and he talks about the fleeting pleasures of sin, that sin can in fact bring pleasure and happiness. It's just not permanent. Did you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I would agree with it, because why would you sin if it didn't provide some benefit, right? I mean,
right.
And fleeting, it's all fleeting within an eternal sense, and that's hard. It's hard to hold that perspective. Mm-hmm. And when we live in a world that's very transactional, then grabbing onto a a temporary happiness from sin feels like as good as we're going to get. So why should I deny myself? And it's not even necessarily trying to be selfish. I mean, we also live in a world where we're telling ourselves where it's necessary. Self-care is an important thing, but what is healthy and appropriate self-care versus selfishness?
Right. Right.
You know, and I'll tell you what, that's something I'm battling with personally right now. It's some, you know, when we talk about counseling, one of the main things that I'm talking to my counselor about is accommodation, which is the idea of doing things for other people and then setting yourself aside and then becoming bitter because it's not reciprocated. So we're working on finding a balance between ensuring that you feed yourself before you start the self-sacrifice. We deal with that as a church. How do we make sure that we feed ourselves and stay healthy as a body so that we are in a good place to serve our community?
Yes. Yeah, I think there's times where Christians particularly can forget that people are motivated by the pursuit of happiness when they're sinning. That's really what they're looking for. And happiness, maybe in a more general sense, maybe it's peace, maybe it's fulfillment, but some kind of positive thing in their soul. They're not necessarily, and us too. I mean, it's not just non-Christians. I mean, us too. When we do these things, buying a disc that you don't really need, there's a joy that you're trying to get, but it's fleeting. You know that it's not going to be permanent. Now you're right. Nothing is permanent, and we do need to have self-care, and it's not always easy to tell when you need to be. I mean, there's a lot to sort out with self-care and all. Yeah. So I just think that's an interesting point that we need to just recognize that they're doing it because of it. Sin feels good.
Yeah, and there. I mean, there's a great song by a guy named David Wilcox called "Breaking the Cup," and it's talking about each of us is a broken vessel, and we're constantly trying to pour things into it. But I got a broken cup, and it keeps leaking out, and ultimately, you know, it's going to the fountain that is never empty and constantly pouring from that fountain into the cup. Now the cup is going to continue to leak, but you're never going to be empty because you're always it's always being replenished by him. You know,
if we let it.
If we let him, yeah, because I mean, it's really easy to like get distracted and move your cup away. And then you're like, oh, I'm empty again. But because it keeps leaking out, I mean, that's where Paul is grateful for the thorn, right? Like, oh, my cup's empty. I need to move it back over.
Right. Right. There's this great passage in Jeremiah that says, my people have committed two sins. One is they've dug cisterns. They've abandoned me, and they've dug cisterns, wells that cannot hold water. And so they've lost the source of the fountain of joy and fulfillment and peace, and they've tried to get it themselves, but those wells are always running dry.
Yeah. And
so it's like we're trying to find joy and peace and happiness and fulfillment and all that sort of stuff in ways that don't. And I find that if I embrace that viewpoint more, it would give me more sympathy, compassion, understanding for my own sin of what am I doing when I'm doing this? Oh, it's not that I'm just simply bad. It's like I'm digging a hole in a cistern that's not going to really get what I want. And the same thing, instead of looking at those people, those people out there who are these horrible sinners, it's like, man, they're just trying to find some happiness. Have some compassion on the fact that they're not going to get what they want, ultimately they're not. So it makes me more sympathetic.
Yeah. We've had this debate about condoning versus understanding, right? That to recognize why somebody is struggling or sinning or whatever doesn't mean that you're condoning what they're doing. It just means you can have some compassion. And and a very extreme example is when Vanessa has worked with sex offenders, that she, digging into their history, their life experience, their family of origin, she understands how they got to where they are. And that means she can love them and have compassion for them. But it does not mean that in loving them and having compassion for them, that she is condoning anything that they have done or will do.
Right. Compassion does not mean condone. And we mix that up.
Yeah.
We really do, don't we? Yeah. Well, it's not just Christians for that matter, but still, yes, that unless you actively say that something is bad, then you're condoning it. Like, no, I don't think you don't have to actively say that's a horrible thing for you not to be condoning it. You can still have compassion on them and care for them and love them, and that's not necessarily condoning.
See, Jesus did that so well. The woman at the well, he's got compassion. Well, or the woman who's being stoned, right? Go and sin no more, right?
Right.
He had compassion for her, didn't condone it, acknowledged that she had sinned, and here you go. You move forward. I'm not agreeing with that, and we have lost that nuance in many ways as Christians. The ability to say I love you, and I'm not necessarily happy with your choices. And to have that be authentic.
Yeah. I think in part though that's where our society in general is. I
agree. There's a lack of compassion and a readiness to judge, and
all spectrums.
It's just that we're supposed to lead and model that.
We should be different, shouldn't we, Chris? Yeah.
And in some ways, circling back to happiness, I think there's an opportunity there that we can foster happiness not just in our own lives but in other people's lives through compassion and understanding and walking alongside people. That a lot of times I think relationships between people, relationships with our Father, that's really what we're trying to fill with materialism and distraction and that stuff. That, like, I am never distracted from toward technology or whatever when I am amongst people who I enjoy and who, like when I think about sitting on the back porch with my dad, right? I would never look at my phone because I'm engaged with this person who is in front of me that I love, and so I think a lot of the happiness killers come out of a lack of healthy relationship,
which is the product of sin.
Yeah.
Sin breaks relationships.
So, Randy, we've made your point for you.
There you go. We did it. All right. Thanks for joining us today on the After Service Podcast. We hope you join us on Sundays, where currently we're going through 2 Peter. So I hope you join us.
Looking forward to seeing you all on Sunday.
Take care.
Take care.